All right, let the record reflect state's present, defense counsel, and the defendant are all present. Please be seated. All right. Oh, are we ready to proceed?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I didn't know if, okay.
Yes, Judge.
All right, so procedurally, we'll call the jury back out. Or you said you have no more witnesses, and Mr. Wilson, I apologize, I know you're talking, and I'll give you more time if you need it, but Mr. Wilson's maintaining his decision not to testify, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and
I'll
then
just stand up and when they come in, I'll rest.
you'll rest, and then the state's going to call their witness in rebuttal? Okay. All right, then are we ready? And do you need more time to talk to Mr. Wilson? You can if you want.
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right, then. Are we ready to bring the jury back out? Let's bring them back. Mr. Shirley.
Sir? Oh, I'm sorry. At this time, on behalf of Mr. Wade Wilson, we would rest our case.
All right. State, any rebuttal?
Yes, Judge. Say we'd like to call Dr. Michael Herkov.
And sir, if you'll just face the clerk, raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You can take the stand. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Would you please introduce yourself to ladies and gentlemen of the jury by telling them your name?
Sure. Michael Herkov, Herkov as in violin.
Now, I refer to you as a doctor. What exactly is it that you're a doctor of?
I have my PhD in psychology.
Could you please describe for us what your qualifications are that allows you to do the work that it is that you do?
Sure. I got my undergraduate degree in psychology at Baldwin Wallace College outside of Cleveland, Ohio. I received my master's degree in clinical psychology from University of Central Florida in Orlando. My PhD in psychology from Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama. I then did an internship at Eastern Virginia Medical Center in Norfolk, Virginia. I then did my psychology residency at the University of Florida College of Medicine in Gainesville. I did postdoctoral training, means after you get your PhD, in neuropsychology at the Gainesville VA. And I did training in forensic psychology at the University of Florida College of Medicine.
You indicated neuropsychology. What exactly is neuropsychology?
You heard some of that, the study of brain behavior relationships. Neuropsychologists tell us how the brain works. It doesn't tell us so much about the structures of the brain, but how the brain is functioning.
You also mentioned forensic psychology. What exactly is that?
Forensic psychology is that interface between psychology and the law. It's where psychologists, neuropsychologists, clinical psychologists bring in information about psychology to places like this so that people who have to make decisions can use that information.
Fair enough, Doctor. Now, are you licensed here in the state of Florida?
I am.
All right. And what exactly is a board certification?
Board certification is, it may surprise you, but a licensor just establishes basic qualifications. Board certification is expertise. It shows that in your particular area. So a physician actually is licensed in Florida as a physician. He or she shows their specialty by being board certified in neurology or surgery or radiology.
You board certified in anything?
Yes, I'm board certified in clinical psychology by the American Board of American Board of Professional Psychology, and I'm board certified in neuropsychology by the American Board of Professional Neuropsychology.
Now, we talked a little bit about forensic psychology. Could you please describe for ladies and gentlemen and jury what your experience was in regards to forensic psychology?
Sure. So I went through the training program at UF in forensic psychology. They actually have a program there that teaches psychiatrists how to become forensically trained, and I went through that program in psychology. As part of that, I ultimately began supervising and teaching within that program, so I was on faculty in that program. I became the director of forensic psychology at the University of Florida College of Medicine, and I was the chief of forensic addiction psychology at the University of Florida College of Medicine.
Now, did you do any evaluations in criminal or civil court while a faculty member at UF?
Absolutely. UF it's one of the rare places. It actually has its own forensic division. So the things I'm doing today, I did when I was on faculty at UF.
Now, did you also serve as a chief forensic addiction medicine at the UF College of Medicine as well?
I was, yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about your occupational history, doctor?
Sure. So after I finished my residency at UF, I was brought on to faculty at the College of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry, where I became a tenured associate professor. So I was at UF from 1990 until 2003. In 2003, I left UF, and I went to the University of North Florida in Jacksonville to run their psychology graduate program. People are getting a degree in psychology. And then I got recruited back to UF in 2009. I was at UF in 2009. When I came back in 2009, I had two appointments. I had one in the College of Medicine where I saw patients at UF Shands Hospital. You are familiar with UF Shands. And then I also had an appointment, what we call at Florida, up the hill in the College of Arts and Sciences, Liberal Arts and Sciences, where in the Department of Psychology, where I actually had PhD students who were becoming psychologists, that I supervised them, their research, and I taught in that program.
Now, what roles or titles have you had at the University of Florida, doctor?
I have been the director of the human behavior course in the medical school, which means I was responsible for teaching the medical students all about human behavior in the first year of their medical training. I was the director of forensic psychology. I was the chief of forensic addiction medicine. I was the director of addiction psychology. I was the program director for a program called UF Cares, where we would bring in physicians who were having some sort of concern about their ability to practice, and we would evaluate them physically, skill-wise, and mental health-wise to see what the problem was and if they could practice. And I started a program at UF called the UF Power Program, and that was a program that was designed for professionals, mostly physicians, but some attorneys, who were very good at what they did, but they never learned what you're supposed to in kindergarten. That's how to play nice and get along with others. And so they were disruptive in the field, and so we fixed them.
Now, you also indicated that you did some teaching as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Could you please describe for us when that began?
Sure. So in the College of Medicine, I told you I was the director of the human behavior course for the medical students. I taught students in the PA physician assistant program. I taught nursing students. I taught undergraduate students. I had a course called the Neurobiology of Addiction that I taught. I then, at UNF, I taught abnormal psychology, how to make diagnoses. I taught substance abuse. I taught psychology and the law. I taught ethics. I taught a bunch of courses. When I came back to UF the second time, I taught in the graduate school. So when I came back and I taught in liberal arts and sciences, I didn't teach undergraduates anymore, only doctoral students. And I taught two courses, which we'll be talking about extensively today. One is the cognitive assessment course, sort of the neuropsychological tests we're talking about. I taught that course. And then I taught what we call the personality assessment course, which specifically deals with psychological issues, specifically tests like the MMPI that we'll be talking about today.
Now, doctor, have you had the benefit of listening into Dr. Eisenstein's testimony here today as well as Dr. Mills's testimony?
I did.
Okay. Now, we've also heard from these doctors as it relates to psychological tests that they administered, specifically the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, the PAI, and the MMPI. Are you familiar with those tests?
I'm familiar, and I taught those tests. I taught those tests in the graduate programs I talked about. I have taught the PAI. I have taught the MMPI. I have published on the MMPI. I have given seminars on the MMPI. So yes, I'm familiar with all those tests, not in terms of only administering them. I've given thousands of those things. I mean, in terms of everything I've done at UF.
Okay, now we're going to get into that a little bit later, but I'd also like to ask of you, have you conducted any research as it relates to your background and training experience in psychology as well?
I have. At UF, you have to see patients, you have to do research, and you have to teach. It's a busy place. And so I have a little over 40 publications on various psychological tests, various psychiatric diagnoses, depression, PTSD, effects of substance abuse on brain functioning. So yes, I'm about 40 or so publications.
Okay, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your experience, Doctor. Could you talk to us a little bit about your clinical experience and what exactly that is?
Sure. So at UF, my primary assignment when I got there was UF Shands Hospital, Shands Teaching Hospital, which you're probably familiar with. I worked on the inpatient psychiatric unit from 1990 until 2003. So saw adult inpatients with a variety of conditions, from depression to schizophrenia to schizoaffective to bipolar to dementia. I mean, UF is what we call a tertiary care center, which means a lot of times people around the state will send cases to us where they say, yeah, let's send this to Shands. And so we see everything. There's probably, I mean, relatively few diagnoses I haven't seen in my career. I also worked on the adolescent inpatient unit. So we had a unit specifically where adolescents who need to be hospitalized were brought in. I worked on that for that period of time. I worked in our outpatient clinic, so seeing patients come in off the street who have, you know, more people like you or I who have depression or marital problems. I worked in our EAP program, our employee assistance program. I worked in the consultation and liaison service, which means when psychology or psychiatry would go to a different floor. So if you're on the surgery floor and you're having some mental health issues, we would come down and evaluate you. I worked at the UF Substance Abuse Treatment Program. UF, again, is one of the few universities we have our own substance abuse treatment center. I was a neuropsychologist there, so I evaluated people cognitively, mostly with impaired professionals, doctors, nurses who had a substance abuse problem. They came in, they got their substance abuse problem fixed, but then the question was, well, okay, have they done any kind of damage to their brain where they maybe can't practice anymore? So I worked in that. I have worked, I had a contract with the Department of Juvenile Justice where I would evaluate adolescents who had gotten into trouble with the law in some way before they got sent to a program. So I'd have to evaluate them and say, hey, do they have mental health needs or cognitive needs that need to be taken into account when they go to that program? I've treated outpatients from older age children all the way up to people in their 70s and 80s.
Now, currently, what exactly are you doing in a clinical setting?
So in 2013, I left the Department of Psychiatry and started my own clinical practice, but I kept teaching until about 2019, right before COVID, and I didn't go back to teaching after that. And so I have my practice right now, and that's all I do.
And now, how much time would you say evaluation and treatment is of your various patients?
So it varies over time, but I'd say right now about 30% of what I do is what I'm going to call patient care, evaluating and treating patients. About 70% is medical legal work, and about 10 to 15% is consultation. And you're going to say, well, that's more than 100%, and that's true. But it goes back and forth.
Now, you indicated that 70% was forensic reviews?
Yes,
evaluations?
medical legal work, yes.
Okay. Now, how much of that would you say is criminal versus civil?
Again, it changes. These days, most of what I do is civil, but I do some. Could I give you an accurate percentage? No, but I will tell you clearly the bulk of what I do is civil.
Now, do you do referrals for both plaintiff and defense?
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me who asked me to see the person. I'll see your person.
Okay, so if it's criminal, do you do work for the state as well as for the defense?
Absolutely, of course.
And what types of patients have you evaluated and treated over the years, doctor?
You know, in the 30 years that I practice, I've seen close to 10,000 patients, evaluated or treated 10,000 patients with virtually almost any diagnosis that you could think of, from schizophrenia to anxiety to ADHD to conversion disorders. I mean, it's, again, maybe there's a couple I haven't seen, but not many.
So mood disorders like depression or bipolar?
Oh, absolutely, of course.
So how about psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia?
Oh, yeah, psychotic disorders and bipolar disorders, they usually end up in a hospital. So, yeah, that was the bulk of what we saw at UF Shands.
Did you see anyone with grief?
Oh, yeah, so a lot of grief. In the EAP program, outpatient, yeah, a lot of people with grief and loss.
What about brain injuries?
Well, sure, that's as a neuropsychologist, that's what I do.
And anxiety disorders?
Absolutely.
And thought disorders?
Yes.
What about substance abuse?
Sure. Yeah, I've published in substance abuse. I said I was the chief of forensic addiction medicine and the director of addiction psychology at UF.
Now, specifically as it relates to substance abuse, did you have an opportunity to treat any adolescents as it relates to substance abuse?
Absolutely.
And what types of things did you note when you began to evaluate individuals, specifically adolescents with substance abuse?
So the substance abuse with adolescents is actually a little tricky. So a parent would bring their child in and say, you know, he's acting differently. He's not doing well in school. He's sullen. His behavior's changing. And I say, well, have you thought about, is he using alcohol or drugs? No. We know it's not that. It's something else. I say, okay, just to be safe, let's get a drug screen. And more often than not, when you see a problem in an adolescent where they have a dramatic change in behavior, the first thing you better start thinking of is substance use.
So when we're talking about substance abuse, is it common for the child to become reclusive?
Absolutely.
Paranoid?
Paranoid, argumentative. I mean, you'll get the story. He was such a nice, and then now he's this. Absolutely.
So perhaps maybe even delusional?
Yeah, depending on the substances you take, absolutely.
Okay. What about hallucinations? Is that possible as well?
Sure. I mean, a lot of, if you're using LSD, if you're using mushrooms, even if you're using amphetamine, you can hallucinate and look very psychotic when you're on drugs. Absolutely.
Now, doctor, have you ever testified or been admitted as an expert here in the state of Florida?
Oh, sure, lots
As
of
it relates
times.
to psychology matters?
Yes.
And what types of things have you testified in?
Neuropsychology, brain injury, substance abuse, psychological problems, grief, fitness for duty, a variety of things.
Now, you previously indicated that you do evaluations in criminal matters as requested by the state as well as the defense. Is that right?
I do.
Now, do you know who retains you to have an impact on your findings?
Absolutely not.
I mean, does the person who's retaining you have an impact on your findings?
No, I was just asked by the state to evaluate somebody for insanity, and I found the person insane. I mean, it doesn't matter who refers them.
And did you, in fact, find them insane?
I did, just on Monday. Last Monday.
Now, what type of experience do you have, if any, as it relates to testifying in death penalty cases, doctor?
I've testified in death penalty cases both for the state and for the defense. I've done work for a group called Capital Collateral, which is this agency that's funded specifically that does death penalty appeals.
Okay. And have you found mitigators for defense?
Of course.
Now, Were you asked to perform anything or do anything in this particular case?
Yes.
What were you asked to do in this particular case?
To get involved, to evaluate Mr. Wilson, and to provide some information in terms of this sentencing about mental health or cognitive issues.
Now, what did you do to answer the questions regarding whether or not there was any type of emotional or cognitive or other factors that would be relevant as it relates to the current issues that we have in this case?
I reviewed records, and I interviewed Mr. Wilson.
When did the interview of Mr. Wilson take place?
Took place on Wednesday, this past Wednesday, which would have been the 19th.
And when you met with Mr. Wilson, could you please describe for us how that came about?
How it came about?
Yes.
I was asked to see him, and I came down to see him.
Okay. And did you ultimately meet with him?
Did I meet with him?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, at the core facility.
And did he, when he met with you, did he indicate to you how much time he was going to spend with you?
Yeah, when we first started off, he was very candid. He said, look, I know that the state has asked you to see me. You're here, working for them. I have my guys working for me. I'm going to give you 15 minutes, and that's it. And I said, okay, I'll take whatever I can get. But we ended up talking for over an hour.
Now, you also indicated prior to actually sitting down or after sitting down with Mr. Wilson, you indicated that you reviewed a series of records.
I did.
Okay. Could you share with us what exactly it is that you reviewed?
I reviewed a lot. So I had, before I met with him, I had reviewed police statements, I had reviewed investigative report, I have reviewed medical records when he was incarcerated, I had reviewed some statements, a statement by Ms. Johnson and a statement by Mr. Testica, am I saying his name correctly? Testica, his biological father. That's what I had done before I had interviewed him.
All right. Did you also, after you had an opportunity to meet with Mr. Wilson, did you have an opportunity to watch the video of Mr. Wilson when he spoke to detectives?
I did.
All right. And did you also have an opportunity to watch the body cam of Mr. Wilson when he was talking to Officer Tim McCormick?
I did.
All right.
This is outside the restaurant? Is that the officer?
That is
Yeah,
correct.
correct.
Yes. And also, did you have the benefit of reviewing the school records?
All after this, yes.
And then apparently there was a timeline that was conducted by and through Mr. Wilson's adoptive mother. Did you have an opportunity to review that?
I did.
And did you also see the records regarding his admittance to the Lee County Hospital?
I did.
And you indicated that you had gone ahead and reviewed the incarceral medical records. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, there was almost over, what, 600 some odd pages in that?
Yeah, it was well over a ream.
Okay. Now, did you also have an opportunity to review the emails that Mr. Wilson had gone ahead and written specifically between himself and a young lady by the name of Kaylee Bogaski, a lady by the name of Andrea Lopez, Erica Bonpastoli, Hannah Hall, Alexis Williams, Jessica DeHanica, Brooklyn Gilly, Riley Texas, and Mr. Steve Wilson?
I did.
Now, did you also have an opportunity to review some of the statements of the witnesses in this case, specifically of Miss Melissa Montanez,
Yes.
and Miss Stephanie Johnson, Mr. Jason Shepard, Miss Amy Slobogian, Joshua Lukic, Mr. Stephen Testaseca, and then Mr. Tyler Klusner? Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, did you also have the benefit of reviewing the defense investigative reports in this particular case as well?
I think there were two.
Yes. And did you review a letter that was written by Mr. Wilson's sister, specifically Miss Wendy Wilson?
Yes.
And did you also have the benefit of reviewing a letter from the mother that was only consistent of one page?
Yes.
And did you review the test data that we heard extensively about this morning from a Dr. Eisenstein?
Yes.
And did you also review the raw test data of a gentleman by the name of Dr. Mark Mills?
I did.
And lastly, Doctor, did you have the benefit of reviewing the depositions of Mr. Eisenstein as well as Mr. Mills, or Dr. Mills, excuse me?
I did.
All right. Now, all that information that you had the benefit of reviewing, is that important to you?
Sure it is.
Why?
Well, because, I mean, not all information is equal, but information, what we call collateral data, gives you a context how to evaluate somebody, not just in terms of what they tell you or what you see at the time, but what's the larger picture.
Now, when you talk about the collateral data, you indicated it's more than what the client is telling you. Now, why is it important what the client's telling you important to compare with the collateral data that you've received?
Well, because what a person tells you may not be correct. It may not be correct because they're simply misinformed. I've asked lots of people if they have a problem, they say they don't. I've asked people if they have a problem, they say they do, and they don't. They may also be trying to deliberately either exaggerate or minimize what's going on. And so what they tell you, you want to be able to take that, okay, what did other people see?
So if someone were to tell you that he was charming, cool, polite, in a good mood, that type of thing, you would also compare that with whatever you had had the opportunity to review in the discovery in this particular case as well. Is that right?
Absolutely.
All right. Now, is any information more valuable than any other, doctor, that you had gone ahead and reviewed in this case?
Yeah, I think it varies by what you're doing, but I think in a case like this, seeing the body cam footage of his interaction with the police officer the morning, the day after this had all happened was very important. Having about 13 years, 10 years of medical records was important. Having the psychological test data from Dr. Eisenstein, who's kind enough to send it to me, was important. Because what it allows me to do is look at the exact same data he sees and to form my interpretation. It's sort of like an X-ray where your physician, she sends your X-ray to another orthopedic doctor and he reviews it. And so we're seeing the same thing. So that type of data in a case like this was important. I think probably on a scale was at the top of what I reviewed.
Now, why is the actual video at the time around this murder, why was that important?
Well, because none of us was there. And so we have to rely on what people tell us happened there, which is valuable and we do all the time. But when I have the opportunity to actually see it with my own eyes, then I'm there. And I get to really form some opinions, not as a police officer describing somebody's behavior is great, but he's a police officer. I'm a clinical psychologist. I look at things and ask things differently. So being able to see it is invaluable.
Now, you indicated that you had received the raw data for the testing that was conducted in this particular case.
I did.
Why is that raw data important to you?
Because I get to see exactly what Mr. Wilson said. I get to see the scores. I get to see the pattern of scores. I get to see the X-ray. I get to look at it and say, okay, is that it? Is that a fracture? No, it really makes what Dr. Eisenstein and I do no different other than his interview, but he's got the data. I'm assuming he did the testing correctly. I have no reason not to. And so I've got his data.
Now, during the course of your opportunity to sit down with Mr. Wilson and review the extensive records in this particular case, as well as all the various statements, the videos and emails and all the other discovery of voluminous matters in this particular case, did you form any type of opinions and make any findings in this particular case?
I did.
All right. Let's talk about your first opinion in this particular case. Does Mr. Wilson suffer from any type of psychotic disorder like schizophrenia or psychoaffective disorder, or from any type of mood disorder?
He does not.
Okay. Now, Dr. We talked a little bit about the DSM-5 TR. What exactly is the DSM-5 TR?
This is the DSM-5 TR, all 1,034 pages of it, and it is the diagnostic and statistical manual. So what it does is it sets the diagnostic criteria for every disorder, okay? A lot of times we use terms in our everyday language, I'm so depressed, or he's schizo, or my sister's bipolar. Well, this tells us what that is, and it has specific criteria. And the reason it has specific criteria is so that clinicians follow it, and so that when I talk about depression, it's the same as Dr. Jones talking about depression. We don't each have our own definitions of depression. These signs and symptoms just weren't thought up by people sitting around having a couple of drinks. It's based on clinical and research data. Over the years, we are now in DSM-5 TR. You heard before the DSM-5 is different from DSM-5 TR in diagnostic criteria. It's not. The diagnostic criteria, the symptoms for depression are the same. What's changed is the text revision. They've updated some of the research, but the diagnostic criteria is the same. And so the DSM has to be followed. Otherwise, depression is whatever I say it is.
Fair enough, doctor. And in preparation for your testimony today, did you also have an opportunity to go ahead and present and prepare a series of slides for us that would basically demonstrate for ladies and gentlemen of the jury what your opinions and findings are in this particular matter?
I did.
Okay. Judge, let the record reflect, I'm showing the defense counsel increasing mark states demonstrative number 2. They have been previously shared with defense counsel at the break. May I approach it?
You may.
Doctor, I'm handing you composite demonstrative states exhibit number 2. As you take a look at those items and those slides, do you recognize those?
Yes, these are slides I prepared.
Very well. So and these would assist you in your testimony here today?
Yes, and explain it to the jury, for sure.
Commissioner Holmes, at this time.
Any objections?
No objection.
All right, you may.
This is Mr. Hollander, the witness.
Now, doctor, as we're looking at this, this is the diagnostic and statistical manual for mental disorders that you just previously described for us.
Correct.
And this is an authoritative text that you rely upon in order to go ahead and diagnose and treat various patients and evaluate them. Is that correct?
Yes, this is the authoritative, and by that I mean this is the standard for making diagnoses.
Now, we had discussed your opinion that Mr. Wilson does not suffer from a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia or a psychoaffective disorder. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, as we're looking at the second portion of your demonstrative aid, why do we not have any evidence of any schizophrenia or psychoaffective or bipolar disorder?
Sure. So we'll just going through the history. There is no indication in any of the medical records that I reviewed from the incarceration going back to 2013 of the psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health counselors employed by the state of Florida in these facilities that made a diagnosis of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or schizoaffective disorder. If there is, I'd like to see it because I could not find it. Now, there is a mention in there where Mr. Wilson says that he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when he was younger. That's what he says. But that's not what he was. They never came up with the diagnosis. He was diagnosed with major depression. He was diagnosed with anxiety. And he was diagnosed with an adjustment disorder. So he was diagnosed with some things, but not these diagnoses. And as you have heard from testimony today, these are serious diagnoses. These are not something that you're just going to sort of miss. And so that whole time there was no history of any of that. Now his family make some statements about him being bipolar, and I'm not attacking their credibility at all. But, part of that comes from, Mom's outline of his behavior. And, it's 4 pages, and she has like one entry for 2002, 2003, 2004. She has May, his 10th birthday, September. I mean, this is hardly a detailed timeline. There is one reference in here in 2007. During the summer, he was changing, quieter, wanted to be alone, always worried about his freckles, took him to a specialist about his jaw. He said he was in constant pain, diagnosis normal. Symptoms of bipolar by Dr. Wilson, family doctor. I don't have any of those records. There's no indication that he was ever treated for a bipolar disorder. You treat that very differently than you treat something else. If you have a schizophrenia or you have a bipolar disorder, you tend to get noticed and you tend to get hospitalized. If you're delusional, if you're bipolar manic, and we may talk about what mania is a little bit, you tend to get noticed. We have no hospitalizations. One, and you heard about this before, one Baker Act when he was 13 or so. It's hard to get the exact age, so we don't have the record. After Dad found drugs, Dad called the cops, police came, he ran away. They took him to the Appalachia Center, which is up around Tallahassee, kept him overnight, he went home the next day. If somebody is schizophrenic, which means they're delusional, they're hallucinating, or they're bipolar, where they're manic, first of all, that's not going to go away in 12 hours, and you're probably not going to go home. On a Baker Act, they can keep you for 3 days, and they're going to keep you for 3 days and watch you. So, I don't know. First of all, I don't even know if that happened. I'm not questioning this, but I have no records about that. But that's the only hospitalization anytime on this. And that occurred, of course, at a time when he was using drugs. We talked about the years of the records where there's no signs and symptoms, but there's also specific examples where he's denying these symptoms. If you look at a record from 9/17/18, he denies mania. So a specific denial there. 10/23/17. It's getting bad. Denies auditory visual hallucinations. Likewise, denies paranoia, panic attacks, mania, and any symptoms of an obsessive compulsive disorder. So it's not just that nobody ever noticed these things. People ask him about it, and there's no record of it anywhere in the file. And then, of course, none of these diagnoses that we've talked about today can be made in the face of substance use. None of them.
Why not?
Because the DSM says not. If you put up the criteria, you will see that every one of these diagnoses says the same thing. And the same thing it says is, I'm just going to read it to you. The disturbance is not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance. Because if somebody is on amphetamine, they can hallucinate, they can talk fast, they can be hyperverbal, they can have delusions. Nothing about schizophrenia is due to the amphetamine. So you can't make it, and it's the same for almost every disorder. Everyone we've talked about today, for sure.
So you made mention of bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
When we're talking about bipolar disorder, what is your concern as it relates to bipolar disorder being a diagnosis for Mr. Wilson?
So for a bipolar disorder, you have to have a series of these constellation of these symptoms. You probably can't see it because I can't see it from that far, but it's closer here so I can see it. But you have to have at least 3 or more of these where it goes from 1 to 7, and they all have to occur at the same time. Like, for example, one of the one of the issues is decreased need for sleep. Well, maybe I couldn't sleep last night because I was worried about coming down here and having to testify in front of everybody. Okay. But did I also show grandiosity, or did I also show, was I also more talkative? So there has to be, these symptoms have to show, it's called a distinct period of time of expansive, elevated, irritable mood for at least a week. You have to see these for at least a week, not for a day, but at least for a week. And I couldn't find anywhere in the medical record that any of these symptoms had been established for a period of time that would meet the DSM criteria.
Now, you also pointed out, as it relates to bipolar disorder, there at the very bottom, that the episode is one that's not attributable to a physiological effects of substance abuse.
Correct.
That was something that you previously mentioned.
Yeah, that's right, for the exact same reason.
And then when we get to psychoaffective disorder.
Schizoaffective disorder, excuse me, it's the same thing. Again, it's a constellation of symptoms. This is even more specific than it is for schizophrenia in terms of you have to have periods of both a mood disorder, like depression or mania, and then you have to have symptoms of schizophrenia in between it. So it's even more specific. And I didn't find, first of all, I didn't find that diagnosis made anywhere in the record. I saw schizophrenia and referred to, but it was under history, and it would be where somebody would report it, but I didn't see him treated and diagnosed using this criteria by anybody who saw him in those medical records.
Would that have been a self-report?
About his history would have been for sure, but I didn't see anybody documenting it and make that diagnosis saying, based upon this, he's got this, this, and this, so we're making this diagnosis. I didn't see that.
And why is that important?
Because it establishes if the diagnosis is there or not. If somebody comes and tells you, hey, I've got bipolar and I've been on XYZ medicine, you may say, okay, let's continue on that medicine without ever necessarily seeing those symptoms in that person. And I think that's what you have here, because up until this time when this event happened, there was no mention of any of that and an actual denial of that in the medical record.
Now, we also lastly get here to schizophrenia.
And I think you went through some of this in previous testimony about the criteria, and is there evidence of the criteria that was met? I didn't see any evidence of delusions in the record. And you were asked, well, if somebody says something and it's not true, is that a delusion? No, that's not a delusion. If somebody tells you something that's not true, it's a lie. A delusion is a fixed false belief that the person maintains even when given incontrovertible data. So my delusion is that the government is hiding microphones in my refrigerator to spy on me. And you say, no, look, Michael, we just did sweeping. And I still believe it. Me telling you that I don't know, that I never break the speed limit, that's not a delusion, that's a lie. Okay? And so there's a difference. And if a person knows what they're telling you isn't correct, it's not a delusion anymore. There's no evidence of any delusions. I was in the same room, I think I was, at the core, where you evaluate people. They have this big, thick piece of glass and this little square, a little circle like this where you talk through, and a little pass-through on the bottom. I'm older, so maybe it's my ears, but I have to speak loud in there. I can hear people in the hallway. I can hear the correctional officers when they walk by. To think that they might be listening to what you're saying, that doesn't even approach a delusion. I think that, yeah, that's probably true. So no evidence of any delusions, no evidence of any hallucinations, denial of hallucinations in the medical record, as I've read to you. No disorganized speech anywhere. And so none of these symptoms are present. And remember, they have to be present for a specific period of time. Not just today, for a specific period of time that DSM talks about. And so I didn't find those symptoms. And even if those symptoms were present, were those symptoms could you rule out that it wasn't due to the effects of a substance? And I don't think you can.
And once again, we get down to the bottom, and that's one of the concerns that the DSM-5 has as well. It talks about the disturbance is not attributable to the physiological effects of substance. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, doctor, as it relates to your second opinion in this particular case, does Mr. Wilson have a long history of substance abuse?
He does.
Now, when we're talking about substance use, you'd also come up with a slide reflecting your concerns as it relates to Mr. Wilson's seeking of substance, using of substance. Is that right?
Correct.
And why is it of concern to you as it relates to Mr. Wilson's mental health?
Well, because she knows that she first started noticing changes in his behavior around 13. That's in her note. Mr. Wilson, in my interview, told me he was a drug addict since he was 13. As I told you before, parents are oftentimes the last one to know that the kid is using. And so while the mother, I believe that she noticed these behavior changes, and then when he gets into school, he starts getting into trouble. What's he get in trouble for? Selling drugs. I think if you wanted to look at the more logical explanation, is, in my professional opinion, is it more likely that this is an emerging schizophrenia or an emerging bipolar disorder, or is this the effects of the drug use? In my professional opinion, you're seeing the effects of the drug use. And the drugs that he used, I mean, talks about cocaine, mushrooms, acid, meth, at various points in his life. So that all of these drugs can affect cognitive functioning, mental status, hallucinations, delusions.
Now, we had also talked about the psychological raw data in this particular case that you also had the benefit of reviewing. Is that correct?
I did, and let me just add one more thing on there. If you look at the mental health records from the incarceration after this event, they have there of a mental status change in him. And if you read it, he's confused, he's not making sense, acting very bizarre. Okay. They take him to the hospital. The hospital diagnoses him with acute respiratory failure, and he tests positive for fentanyl. Okay, so that's a good example of drug use even while he was incarcerated, and drug use affecting mental status.
Now, as it relates to the psychological test data, was Mr. Wilson over reporting his mental health symptoms?
Absolutely.
What leads you to believe that?
So he was given a test, as Dr. Mills talked about, the MMPI. MMPI is the most frequently used psychopathology test, primarily because it has two sets of scales. One set of scales that tells you what the symptoms are: depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, etc. But another set of scales that are called validity scales. It tells you how the person approached the test, right? Because psychological self-report is valuable. I mean, you want to ask somebody how they're doing, find out how they're doing, ask them. But it's also manipulable, right? If you have a broken leg, they're going to take an x-ray. It's going to show an x-ray either broken or not. It doesn't matter how you feel about that. But when it comes to mental health symptoms, if you're depressed, you can say you're not depressed. And if you're not depressed, you can say you're depressed. And so people, it's almost a natural reaction. If you're taking the MMPI because you're going through a child custody evaluation, where it might determine whether you get custody of your child, you're going to have a tendency to kind of minimize your psychological problems, right? If you're in a situation where your mental health, in a criminal situation where your mental health symptoms may be of some benefit to you, you may exaggerate your symptoms. So while the MMPI, so Dr. Mills used an interpretive report on the MMPI. And if you go to the next one, this is the interpretive report. And the MMPI, I teach the MMPI, published on the MMPI. I love the MMPI. So it says that the profile is invalid. Okay. And that's true. It is invalid, but it's invalid in the sense of what you can make from the clinical scales. But if you read what it says, and you can maybe read it, so I'll read it to you. It says, this profile is invalid because the test taker generated an excessive number of infrequent responses to the MMPI 3 items. This level of infrequent responding is uncommon, even in individuals with genuine, severe psychopathology. Okay. Go down, and it says, in addition, he provided an unusual combination of responses that is associated with non-credible memory complaints. Now, you have to keep in mind, that interpretation wasn't arrived at by Dr. Mills, and it wasn't arrived at by me. It was arrived at by the test publisher, who simply took those responses and compared it to a database of thousands of people who responded to the MMPI. And so that's telling that the MMPI is, that at least in this situation, when he took the test, he was exaggerating his symptoms. So if he's telling you something, you have to be careful how much credence you give to that unless you have some other data to support that.
So in evaluating someone who has these psychological systems, I mean, you rely upon something beyond just self-report. Is that what you're telling us?
Well, you have to. I mean, that's what the test is for. You absolutely, especially in a forensic setting like this, collateral data is essential.
And there are ways in order to go ahead and test that. Is that right?
Correct, and you just saw one of them.
And how familiar are you with this MMPI?
I mean, I've published numerous articles on the MMPI. I taught it for 10 years at UF. I'm familiar with MMPI 1, MMPI 2, MMPI 2RF, and now MMPI 3. So I feel like I know the MMPI.
Very well. Now, you also, when we're looking at this protocol validity, are those your interpretations of the test?
They are not. They are, like I told you, the test publisher that doesn't have the proverbial dog in the fight. They're just telling you what their data shows.
Now, let me ask you, as it relates to your next opinion, doctor, did you have an opportunity to determine whether or not his mental health history would be consistent with any type of adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety or depressed mood or anything along those lines?
You know, those are diagnoses that were given in there by the people that he saw. I think it would make sense. An adjustment disorder is a psychological reaction to a stressor. You're incarcerated, that's a stressor. He certainly, I mean, it's clear. He reports depression and anxiety throughout his mental health records. I mean, that you need to be aware of. That for sure. But the other stuff, no.
And so that'd be consistent with someone who is actually incarcerated, correct?
Correct.
That they would be depressed.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, does Mr. Wilson have any type of frontal lobe brain damage that would account for his behaviors that you're aware of, that you've actually had the opportunity to observe or review in any of the records?
After viewing the records, the raw psychological test data is my professional opinion within a reasonable degree of psychological probability. He does not.
Now, as we're looking up here at the screen, we have no history of brain injury.
Yeah.
How did you come to that conclusion?
Well, we've heard the term today a lot of places, his history of head injuries, okay? And we have been given examples of playing baseball, he got a bump on his head. Those are not head injuries. I mean, if you have kids that get bumps on heads, if you yourself may have had bumps on your head, that's not a head injury. When you're playing football and you get hit, you may feel woozy for a lot of reasons. You may have got the wind knocked out of you. Just because you played football for 4 years in high school doesn't indicate that you've had any kind of a head injury. He reports 2 motor vehicle accidents. which I don't have any records of, defining a head injury, defining a traumatic brain injury is also defined in this DSM. There are specific symptoms you have to have at the time of the event. Now, I don't know Mr. Wilson's family. I didn't talk to them. But everything I've heard about them says that they're good, caring people. It's hard to imagine that if there was some concern that there was something strange with their child, that they wouldn't take him to get evaluated if they thought that he had some sort of a head injury. We have no records of a head injury. We have a reported CT. We haven't seen it, but we have reported CT beforehand. And the statement was, well, if they had a CT, it must have been a brain injury. No, it would be done to rule out. So if you went to the ER right now and said, I have a throbbing headache in the side of my head right here, they're going to do a CT of your brain. Why? To make sure you don't have a tumor. That doesn't mean that they think you have a head injury. They're going to get the CT and they're going to say no. He had a second CT, at least one that we do know. This is when he reported headaches and a pressure in his head, is what he says. They take him to Lee Memorial or somewhere here, I think maybe a mobile place. I forget how it works. They do a CT of the brain, and it comes out negative. Okay, nothing there to support this, and he gets put on Flonase. I'm not a physician, but Flonase is often used for sinusitis and people who have those kind of headaches with allergies. I don't know, but the idea was they did not say brain injury. In fact, it says normal brain CT. So there's no evidence anywhere so I have a hard time when you say, well, it's a history of head trauma. I can't agree to that because I don't have evidence of it.
And you also indicated you had an opportunity to review the incarcerative medical records that did not indicate any cognitive problems. Could you please expand on that, Doctor?
Yeah, so part of what they do here is that they do mental status examinations on you, that they're looking to see if you have these problems. And there are numerous medical records that nowhere in the medical record did I find that he was demonstrating memory problems or cognitive issues. You say, well, maybe they're not looking for that, and you might have it and somebody doesn't notice. Granted. But if your memory's at the second percentile, you're going to notice that. That is really impaired. And in fact, the medical records that you do see indicates memory intact. So I didn't see any evidence of a diagnosis of a traumatic brain injury or of what they call a neurocognitive disorder, something wrong with how you think, anywhere in the medical records before and after this event.
Doctor, as it relates back to this particular case, you indicated that you had the opportunity to view the actual or listen to the actual statement that he gave to detectives.
I did.
Now, you also had the opportunity and benefit of going ahead and reviewing the various police reports as it relates to the facts and circumstances in this particular case. Is that right?
I did.
Now, did you find that in his statement that he gave to detectives that he had any cognitive problems relaying to the detectives what actually happened?
There was I didn't see anything where he reported memory issues with this. His reporting of things in many ways matched up with what other witnesses were saying, Miss Johnson, or the person at the Mateo Graphic, I forget the name where he went to. There was no significant discrepancy. He was able, to say in there how when police were looking for him, he was watching them and knew where they were when they were searching for him. So there was no indication of any memory impairment anywhere that I saw.
And lastly, Doctor, when you referred to neuropsychological testing results were not consistent with a neurocognitive disorder, what do you mean by that?
That I don't think that the neuropsychological test results show a brain injury and certainly not a frontal lobe injury.
Now let's talk about those a little bit. I think you had the benefit of listening to Dr. Eisenstein, who gone ahead and conducted a series of cognitive testing upon Mr. Wilson. Is that correct?
Correct. So I had the benefit of the raw data. So what Dr. Eisenstein sends to me is all the forms, his scores, how he did on it. And then I was able to take those scores and put them into a graph for you so that you can see and to try to make sense of it all. Okay. What you see there, and it's so hard to see, I wish it was better, but when you see the line at the bottom is at 25 and the red line at the top is at 75. And those are percentiles. So the easiest way to explain the data to you is in percentiles, right? And you heard this a little bit. A percentile is how do you match up to other people. So if you're at the 99th percentile, you are better than a line of everybody on the earth, 100 people, you're 99, you're better than the 98 people behind you. If you're at the first percentile, there's nobody behind you. You're at the very bottom of it. We typically call the average range, where most of us fall, okay, most of us are average, between the 25th and the 75th percentile. So when you look at these scores, we're going to see that Mr. Wilson's general IQ, that's the first one, average range, just like everybody else. The second one is his verbal comprehension. That's his ability to use language. That's smack dab in the average range. His perceptual reasoning, his ability to figure out like puzzles and things like that, that's a little low. That falls into the borderline range, 6th percentile, so that's a little low. His working memory, which is a frontal lobe measure. Working memory takes place, it's your ability to temporarily hold information and process it. So like, you know, when I tell you a list of things and want you to manipulate it, that's where your working memory is. His score there is in the average range. And his processing speed, how fast, you know, you can respond to things and pay attention to things, is in the average range. A very important component of frontal lobe function. So when we look at these things, we have these test scores within the average range. Now, when we get over here at the bottom, we have some pretty impaired scores. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. We have memory scores that range from, I think, the 5th percentile down to the 2nd percentile. Those are impaired. There's no doubt about that. We'll talk a little bit more about those later, but just keep that in mind, that those scores are falling at the 2nd percentile, which means out of 100 folks, he's at number 2. There's only one person below him. So this is the general cognitive testing results. And then Dr. Eisenstein was good enough to do some specific tests on frontal lobe functioning. So as neuropsychologists, we can test different parts of the brain. We know that the memory is in your temporal lobe, and so we have special tests that can do that. We know that ability to be flexible in your thinking is more frontal lobe. And so we have a wide variety of tests. If you go to the next slide.
And that's where we're talking about the executive functioning tests that Dr. Eisenstein had gone ahead and had Mr. Wilson perform. Is that correct?
Yes. So there are a couple of tests that he did. The first one is the working memory. We talked about that. That's in the average range. The next test is a digit span test, which is your ability to focus. You have to, I repeat digits to you, 1, 5, 7, 9. You have to say it back to me. Then I say 1, 5, 7, 9, and you tell them to me backwards. And then I say 1, 5, 7, 9, and you tell them to me in order. Very complex cognitive functions in the average range. Another test in the average range is a test called similarities, very frontal lobe. I tell you, how are a bicycle and a car alike? They're both transportation. And then it gets harder. How are poverty and wealth alike? So it goes, but it really requires your brain to synthesize, because you have to know poverty, you have to know wealth, and you have to be able, how are these things the same, because they sound pretty different to me. In the average range, and then arithmetic. Arithmetic is not just a math test, so it's ability of working memory. So the test is relatively simple, the math is simple, But I'll say to you, you know, John went to the store, he bought 2 dozen eggs, he bought 4 onions, 2 cans of soup. How many items did he buy altogether? And you have to remember what was said in all that. The math is simple, you just add them up. But to be able to remember all that, everything is in the average range. He does score particularly low on a test called the Wisconsin card sorting test. That's the one Dr. Eisenstein described to you, where you have to match things. He did pretty low in that, no doubt about it. So we have a particular frontal lobe test that he did not do well on.
Is there a concern there, Doctor?
Well, it could be. Let's go to the next slide.
Very well.
Dr. Eisenstein was concerned about frontal lobe executive function, which is reasonable. And so he gave a specific battery of tests called the Dellis-Kaplan Executive Function System. All of these tests are designed to test one thing: executive frontal lobe functioning. Okay. And we heard before that Mr. Wilson didn't score in the average range in any of those. That's not correct from the data. He actually scored in the average range on almost all of them. And in fact, he scored in the high average range. One of the tests, man, my eyes are getting so bad. I need to get glasses. Okay. The fourth one in, 1, 2, 3, 4, trial is called letter number sequencing, which means you have numbers and letters randomly placed on a page. And you have to go 1A, 2B, 3C, 4D. You have to have cognitive flexibility. You have to be able to switch back and forth. That test is well within the average range and almost in the high average range. So I have to take that result and I have to compare that to the one I showed you on the previous page, the Wisconsin card sorting test, where he did poor on a test that measures perseveration or ability to switch back and forth between things. And so when I look at all of these tests together, okay, there is not a pattern of frontal lobe dysfunction. You heard Dr. Eisenstein say that you would never make a diagnosis based on one test. And so I have to look at, do I have a pattern here of executive function deficits? And the answer is, on the testing, no. And then do I have a pattern of executive function deficits outside of the testing? So when I look at this testing, I do not see evidence of a clear frontal lobe, any type of frontal lobe impairment. Yes, there's a test that he does poorly on. But you know, the fact of the matter is, this is data. If you give a battery of neuropsychological tests to college students, they will fall into the low range on 1 or 2 of them. It's just how it is. That some things you're good at, some things you're not. If I saw a pattern, if these executive function tests were all down low, then I'd be probably telling you something different today. But when I just have 1 or 2, and even on the one where he does the verbal fluency, he's able to give a number of, when you ask him to give you a list of words based on the first letter they start with, he does fine. When you tell him that to give you animals, he does poorly, very poorly. I can't, that doesn't make neuropsychological sense. It makes much more sense that he got tired, or he said, the heck with this, or something else. But remember, in neuropsychological testing, you can't be worse than your highest score. You can be better than your lowest score, but you can't fake smarter than you are, right? You just can't do that. And so when I see these average test scores, to me, it indicates that we don't have an issue here.
So if you take a test and you ultimately decide, you know, you're either too tired or you stop, and could that affect your scores?
Absolutely. I mean, of course it does. Sure.
Now, lastly, Doctor, I wanted to ask you about whether or not you formed an opinion as to whether or not his memory and executive function test scores are consistent with his behavior.
Are what?
Are consistent with his behavior.
They are not.
And why do you say that, doctor?
Well, we talked about this a little bit, but somebody with that severe executive function issues, they have a hard time functioning in their life. I mean, operating a motor vehicle, taking care of themselves. If you have memory at the second percentile, I think on one of the tests Dr. Eisenstein gave him, he told you he fell 7 standard deviations below the mean. Remember that? So 1 standard deviation below the mean puts you at the 16th percentile. 2 standard deviations below the mean puts you at the 2nd percentile. 3 standard deviations below the mean puts you at the 0.1 percentile. I don't know how you get to 7 standard deviations below the mean. That would be such, it's almost an impossible score. How could that be? No tables I know go down that low, because you can't be 7 standard deviations below the mean. How can that be, and how could you even interact? When you look at his memory, we don't see this. This would be catastrophic memory impairment, right? It would be catastrophic. It would be noticed by somebody in the last 10 years.
And you didn't see any catastrophic memory issues with Mr. Wilson in this particular case?
No memory issues at all.
And even when he sat down with detectives and relayed to them exactly what he had done and described the events to the detectives, you indicated that that was consistent with the information that detectives had. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So that would be consistent with your conclusion that he did not have any memory deficits.
Correct. I mean, the emails to these people are very detailed from what they talked about before. I don't see anything.
Why is no evidence of mania or psychosis important to you as it relates to inconsistencies of data and behavior, doctor?
Because you might not notice somebody in prison who was depressed, right? Parents may not notice a depressed child because he's just sort of quiet and stay. Teacher may not notice a depressed child. They'll notice a manic child because his behavior is going to be in their face. It's going to be disruptive. There is no indication of that to meet the criteria anywhere that I could find in the record that I reviewed.
You didn't notice any of that in the police interview with him?
I did not.
And you didn't notice any of that on the police body cam that you observed with Officer Tim McCormick?
No, he's actually very coy and focused there, right? I'm here to meet my girlfriend. What are you talking about? Puts the window halfway down, and then when the officer starts saying, I'm just waiting for my buddy to get here. Can you shut the car off? And that's when he skedaddles.
You also indicated that you relied upon witness statements such as the one to Joshua Lukic, as well as Miss Melissa Montanez, as well as Miss Stephanie Johnson.
Yes.
And would those also be indicatives of you didn't see any evidence of any type of mania or psychosis in those statements?
I didn't in anything I reviewed.
Now, lastly, I believe we'd already discussed that you did not observe any evidence of any type of executive function brain damage in any of the records. Is that what you're telling us here today?
I did not. I just showed it to you.
What about the events surrounding the murders?
I did not.
How did you come to that conclusion, doctor?
That there was nothing, I mean, while the behavior was aberrant, I mean, it was something that we wouldn't do, the behaviors were planned in a sense, right? That I can't find the school. Can you help me find the school? Oh, it's over there. Yeah, I looked. I couldn't find it. Can you show me? I mean, afterwards, fleeing, the going to the friend. Hey, I just killed some people. I need to get out of town. Calling some people. Hey, I need some help. Hiding from the police. All of that is relatively good planned behavior. I mean, maybe you wouldn't do it, but it's not this impulsive, I didn't know what to do.
And now, last line that you had there was life functioning. What evidence or no evidence did you find of executive function, brain damage, and life functioning? What do you mean by that, doctor?
I don't have any problems with him doing adult daily living activities. He drives, he's able to interact with people, he's able to socialize when he goes out to the bar. He's able to interact. There's just no evidence of this frontal lobe damage that we've heard about.
And was he able to seek help when he needed it,
For sure.
especially after he did something bad?
Correct.
May I have a brief moment, Judge?
Yes.
Yes, Doctor, I have one last little question for you. You indicated back in your training experience, did you have an opportunity to become involved in and familiar with the jail mental health treatment of individuals?
Absolutely, I did.
Could you please describe for us what your experience is in relation to that particular area?
Sure. Back in the early 1990s, the state of Florida got sued by the Department of Justice because they weren't providing adequate mental health care to people in jails. And so at that point, as part of the settlement with the federal government, they started out of the governor's office a program called the Correctional Medical Authority. And what the Correctional Medical Authority did would bring people like me, consultants, psychiatrists, psychiatric nurses, and we would go into to the prisons and jails, and we would review the medical records. We would talk to the inmates to make sure that the inmates were getting adequate medical care. The state of Florida was doing it so that they wouldn't get sued again, but also to do the right thing. So I have been in reception centers, correctional institutions, jails all over the state, reviewed hundreds of these files. And I can tell you that the mental health people that the state of Florida employs are licensed. They're responsible for the same ethics and standards that I am. And so I would expect them to be able to see a bipolar disorder there, or to be able to see a memory disorder or something if it's there.
Why is it important that inmates get the appropriate care while in custody, besides obviously the jail being sued?
Well, because first of all, you want to do the right thing, right? I mean, we're compassionate people. If you have a problem, we want to help you. But secondly, if you have a patient, an inmate that is bipolar or that is schizophrenic and untreated, they're going to be a significant behavior problem. We talked about that they're interested in control. Well, part of that may be true, but those are two populations you better control.
And why is that?
Because they'll be disruptive. Imagine a schizophrenic inmate who was having delusions on the cell block or anywhere else. It would be horrible.
Would you consider that to be a safety concern as well?
Oh, for everybody, not just for the inmate, but for the people around him.
Now let me ask you this, Doctor. As it relates to Mr. Wilson's medication history, did you have an opinion as it relates to that?
Yeah, so Mr. Wilson's medication history up until he was arrested for this consisted only of an antidepressant, almost always Celexa. When he came into jail at this time on this, he told the staff that he was on a variety of these medications, and they started those medications. I don't have any, we say he's been on all these medications. I don't have any record he's been on anything but Celexa and maybe another antidepressant up until he came in for this event. And I don't have any medical records that he ever sought treatment when he wasn't receiving it from incarceration.
Okay. I have no further questions for the witness at this time, Judge. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Hollander.
Afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Holland.
It's the evening. Just a few questions. Sure. You are not an MD, a medical doctor?
I am not.
You testified earlier that you met with Mr. Wilson for over an hour?
I wrote down an hour and 5 minutes.
Okay. Did you do any testing yourself?
I did not.
You said that you're in private practice now?
I am.
Okay. You do mostly civil. What type of work do you do for civil?
So as a neuropsychologist, it'd be traumatic brain injury. Somebody was involved in a motor vehicle accident, or they had a fall, and do they have a brain injury? I will do things such as post-traumatic stress disorder. Somebody had something happen to them. They were attacked, or they were in an accident. Do they have PTSD? I will see people for grief. They've lost somebody, and how are they coping with that loss? I mean, those are general areas.
When you deal with people who have suffered traumatic brain injury, do you, or can you, since you're not an MD, can you request brain scans?
No, I would have to have a neurologist or another physician. I could ask a physician to, but I don't know how I would do that. No.
Okay. Do you review brain scans in your practice?
No, I don't review the scans. I review the report of the physicians with the physicians. But no, I don't look at actual films.
Okay. Do you request MRIs instead of CAT scans, depending on the nature of the injury?
How to request any of those? Usually they will come to me. So even when I was at UF, I don't request an MRI. It would be that somebody had a fall, and here's their MRI, and let's do some neuropsych testing on them.
What type of criminal cases? What type of criminal practice?
So it's varied over the years. When I was at UF, we had our training program. We did a lot of competency because the good training cases. Now I would say that I mostly do, last 10 years probably sanity mostly, some competency, some mitigation.
Do you do any court-appointed cases for a criminal? I guess it would be defense.
Well, so I had a recent competency where I was appointed actually by the judge, so to report to the court. That was a Volusia kind of case. That was competency. So that was, I guess, is that what you're asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Not a lot of those.
Not a lot?
No.
Okay, how many have you done?
Oh, I could never tell you the number, but
Well, since you went into private practice.
Again, I don't keep those kind of records. I could tell you that would be the smallest number of what I do.
Okay. Does that mean that the rest of your criminal cases, you're privately retained?
So when you mean privately retained, most of the time I'm asked by the state or the public defender's office. There are some times where there is a private defense attorney who will ask me to get involved. So I've had some of those, but those are also rare. Usually it's part of the government legal system.
What is your hourly rates or for your professional services?
So it's different for civil and criminal. For criminal cases, it's $3.50 an hour for everything, except for travel, which is $200 an hour.
And civil?
Civil is $4.50 an hour for everything. Travel is $300 an hour, and any kind of testimony or a deposition or trial is $600 an hour.
Is that both civil and criminal?
No. It's, I can if you want me to, but no. For criminal, it's the $3.50 flat rate for everything except travel.
Okay, so it's $600 for testimony in the civil cases.
Yeah, deposition or trial.
Okay.
And it goes up.
How many hours have you put into this case?
So I had a couple of hours reviewing some records, maybe 3 or 4 hours before I came down on Wednesday. Wednesday, I was given a big stack of records to review. So Thursday, so mostly Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I did mostly this. Friday, as you know, I was in all the depositions that took place, and then Saturday. So I've been, this is not an exact figure, but I'm probably somewhere around 20 hours since if we add it all together.
When were you first asked or introduced to the case, brought into it?
I don't know. There might be an email, or I didn't bring that information. I was contacted though several months ago that I might be asked to get involved in the case if there was a conviction and there was any kind of this type of hearing. But I don't have an independent recollection of that. But that's likely what would have happened.
Okay. Now, you said you, as part of your preparation, you reviewed records.
I did.
Okay. You said you reviewed school records. How many of those did you say review?
I think there are 2 pages of them. Leon County School Board.
That's Tallahassee?
Yeah, Leon County's Tallahassee. I think those are the same records that Dr. Mills and.
Is there anything, were you expecting more records from Leon County?
I don't know what to expect. I got these on Friday during the depositions. Before that, I wasn't aware that that these records even existed.
You said you interviewed Mr. Wilson on the 19th of June?
I did.
Okay. You see anything in there where he apparently knew who you were? Did you see anything in there indicating he was lying?
That he knew who I was.
Well, first off, he knew who you were, right? He told you, I'm going to talk to you for 15 minutes. We're done.
Well, the way it usually comes in, I say, hey, look, Mr. Wilson, my name is Dr. Herkov. I've been asked to do an evaluation on you by the state. I go through all the parameters. Hey, look, this is forensic. I'm not your treating doctor. Nothing you tell me. I don't say things off the record. So whether he knew, I'm sure you told him I was coming. I mean, somebody must have told him I was coming. It was arranged with the jail. But that's typically what I do in the beginning. I explain why I'm here.
Anything during that hour and 5 minutes that indicated he was lying to you?
I didn't get the impression that he was lying. I mean, he was pretty straightforward, at least in terms of what he told me. And I didn't want to talk about the case because I get that, so we didn't talk about that. But his history, again, he says he was bipolar. I don't see that a lie. He says that. I just didn't have the record to believe. But no, I don't think I didn't get anything where I thought he was lying to me.
Okay. Anything in there where you thought he might be delusional or hallucinatory?
Clearly not. There was no paranoia. There was no delusions. There was no active hallucinations.
You said you reviewed the statement he made to, I think it was Detective Hicks.
I don't remember the detective name, but yeah, I've got yeah, absolutely.
Did you see in there where he said that when Miss Ruiz tried to run away, he ran her over 10 or 20 times?
I did see that.
Did you see the photograph of Miss Ruiz under the bush when they found her?
I did not.
Okay, so you didn't see that her blouse had zero tears, shreds, or anything else?
No, I saw the medical examiner report about the injuries, but no, I didn't see any photos.
You said you saw 10 to 13 years of medical records.
Yes.
Was that part of that stack of records you received?
Yeah, the ones that I saw went back to 2013.
Okay. And they were from what facility or facilities?
Well, I didn't bring the whole stack with me, but it was from places where he was incarcerated.
And he was given lithium?
Not before, no. None of,
For what?
not before 2019 when he came in for this arrest. All the records I looked at before, all I saw was Celexa. Now, if that's wrong, show me and I'll admit to it.
Okay. And what is Celexa for?
Celexa is what we call an SSRI. It can be used to treat both depression and anxiety.
And that, he had that for, how long was he being prescribed that, going backward?
Can't tell you the exact, but for a good part of that time. I don't know if it started exactly in 2013, but that was a common medication that he received.
So somebody, several people along the way decided that's what he needed.
Absolutely. As I said before, I think the depression and anxiety he reports is pretty consistent in the medical record.
In your career, have you ever reached a conclusion or deviated from the DSM, from their classifications?
Well, I'm sure if I did, you're going to point it out to me, but I don't recall. I mean, the DSM is what I use for making my diagnoses.
Well, I understand, and each diagnosis has a certain number of criteria.
Correct.
Have you ever run into a case where you've said, I know that this says this, but I think this?
I don't recall it. I don't recall if I did that.
Who prescribed the lithium and the Paxil?
I can't give you a name, but this would have been the psychiatrist after his most recent incarceration. So after October 8th, 2019 is when I saw those medicines and others being prescribed.
Was it a doctor that prescribed them? Had to have been, right?
I mean, in the state of Florida, I mean, it could be a nurse practitioner, but I'm assuming I think it was a psychiatrist, but I'm assuming that, but I can't give you the person's name. I don't recall that.
And while we're on that, the commission in 1990, all these jails have gone to private providers now, haven't they? None of them have their own employees.
No, but the CMA is still responsible for. I mean, you probably know it was the Costello case that got Florida in Dutch on it. So I don't know what all the dynamics are, but yeah, you're correct. Most of the jails now are being run by private companies who are providing the providers.
And the private companies make their money by saving the jail money, correct?
Well, you're getting into something that's beyond my expertise as a psychologist and neuropsychologist. I don't know the economics of it.
But I thought you were still on the committee.
No, I don't do it now. I've done that for years. I've looked at over the years. No, I haven't done it in several years.
How do you treat bipolar disorder?
A bipolar disorder, like a schizophrenia, is to be primarily treated through medication.
Which medications?
I mean, I'll leave that up to the psychiatrist, but there are a number of mood stabilizers, from lithium to sometimes they use anticonvulsants. There are probably half a dozen so different medications they use to treat bipolar disorder.
Did I misunderstand you that if you're dealing with a bipolar person untreated, they're going to end up in a hospital?
A person in a manic, not every single person, but people with in a manic episode are disruptive, and they will be noticed, and they oftentimes end up in hospitals.
And what about in jail?
The jail actually has, in Florida, the jail has hospitals. The jail has places called CSUs, critical crisis stabilization units, where they can go to. They have TCUs, transitional care units, and they have a mental health hospital up in Tallahassee, the correction up at
Chattahoochee?
Chattahoochee is where you go when you're, but there is CMHI, correctional. So they actually have a mental health hospital you can go to while you're in prison and come back. So they have all those things.
They have them, but do they use them?
I've seen people sent to them. I can't tell you the dynamics or the frequency, but they have them. I would assume they use them.
You said that on September, well, let's go the other way. October 23rd of 17, that Mr. Wilson denies auditory hallucinations.
Yeah, I got the note right here.
He was in custody at the time, correct?
Correct. Yeah, for sure.
What happens if he says he is hearing voices?
I mean, a number of things could happen, from nothing to being placed on medication.
What about on September 12th of 18, he denied mania?
Correct.
And what happens if he admits that he's having manic episodes?
No, that if you read that is he's denying a history of mania. If somebody has mania and they're in front of you, they don't have to admit it. You can see it. So this is more, if you read that note, they're talking about his history of mania, not mania at the time.
I may have misunderstood, I apologize.
Yeah.
But if he knows, or if he wants to avoid the effect of admitting something, he could just deny it to you.
Sure, he denies something that's there, or make up something that's not. Absolutely.
Do you agree with Dr. Mills's statement that cocaine makes people with psychotic issues more volatile?
Well, I mean, cocaine, again, I think Dr. Mills said you have to look at each individual substance on a particular person because different drugs. But cocaine is pretty stimulating. It can make you psychotic all on its own. If you're psychotic and you take cocaine, it ain't going to help.
Okay. Can it exacerbate?
Yeah, it could. It could, for sure.
Could it make you have black holes for eyes?
I'm sorry?
Could it make you have black holes for eyes, no soul?
Black holes for eyes, no soul. I mean, I'm not sure that's a clinical psychology question.
All right, we'll pass. I get you're complaining that they don't have records. Am I correct? That there's no records to...
I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that the only records that I do have that go back to 2013 don't document anything that's here. The fact that we don't have records before, I'm not complaining. I mean, it is what it is. But we don't have anything that could say other than self-reports.
Well, you also have the adoptive mother. I mean, she made a 4-page sort of report.
I mean, so I have nothing bad to say about the adoptive parents. But, I mean, let's look at her report. 2005, May 11th birthday, September, Deer Lake Middle School, Tallahassee. That's her report for 2005. I mean, 2006, May 12th birthday, September, DLM. I think that may have been, I don't know. I mean, these are 2009, expelled from Childs, entered alternative high school, lives at home, May 15th birthday, September alternative high school, November Pop dies. He was very close to him. I mean, that's what she wrote, but that's hardly a detailed mental health assessment.
Okay. But you incorporated that in your consideration, though, right?
I got it on Friday, and I've certainly looked at it since then, for sure.
And you've seen the sister/doctor's report, the statement?
I
you
have,
seen-
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There are no, I'll call them old reports from medical facilities where he may have been treated.
Not that I've seen.
So I get the feeling that you basically evaluated the data from Doctors Mills and Eisenstein and just say, I don't agree with it.
Well, I don't know if I looked at the data from Dr. Mills, and we both agree that the MMPI is invalid. We both agree that the MMPI is exaggerated, so at that data, we agree. When they say that he has been diagnosed with schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder while he's incarcerated, I can't find those diagnoses. So if you show them to me, I'll say, okay, I made a mistake. You're right. I see in there where he reports a history of that. And I see where, and even in the medical records before this, I see where he says he has a history of bipolar disorder, but I don't see any documentations of the symptoms. So I don't necessarily disagree with them. They're both smart guys. They can give their own opinions. I'm just telling you that when I look at the data, I don't see the same thing for the reasons I gave you. And they told you why they found it for the reasons they gave you.
One moment, Judge.
Yes, sir.
Doctor, one last question. Did you personally recalculate the results from Dr. Eisenstein's raw data?
So what I did was I did two things. So on his scores for like on the MMPI, I didn't recalculate anything. I just took the publisher's printout, what they did. So I didn't recalculate that. On the Wait a second here. I'm sorry, I got papers all over the place. On the DKEFs, the Dellis-Kaplan Executive Function System,
Yes.
I took his numbers and I went to the manual and I looked up the scores, what it would be, and it was the same scores he got.
Okay. And the manual being the DSM, or is there some other?
No, so remember we talked about the test, the Dellis-Kaplan Executive Function System? So that has a manual where you say, okay, if it takes the person 18 seconds to do this and they're 35 years old, then that gives you this score, and this score corresponds to the 20th percentile.
Okay,
And
so
so
that's
I got the exact same scores he did.
separate publication from the DS.
Oh, yeah, no, it's
Okay.
for the test, yeah.
All right. Nothing further, Judge.
All right. Anything else? All right, sir, you can step down.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you all.
You want to switch and talk about scheduling? All right. Any other rebuttal witnesses for the state? Okay.
We would recall Dr. Eisenstein to the stand, please.
All right. And this is the sir rebuttal.
Sure, rebuttal. Very, very, very brief.
All right. You can come up. Sir, you're still under oath. You can take the stand. All right, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, you've heard Dr. Herkov testify here today, is that correct?
Correct.
And he basically said that he got the same numbers you did?
Correct.
And how do you reach those numbers?
So there's manuals, there's normative data. For example, on the Wisconsin card sorting test, there's norms based on his age. And when I calculated there was 7 standard deviations below the mean, those are real numbers. The level of impairment is so profound that it is beyond what we normally expect. And as a neuropsychologist, we need to explain it. We don't dismiss numbers. We don't dismiss data. We look at it very seriously, and we have to understand how the brain is processing that in contrast or in relationship to all the other data.
So a 7-level deviation doesn't even have, it's so low it doesn't even have a numerical equivalent?
That's correct.
The only other question I've got is, in reviewing the jail records, prison records, all of the other records, presumably everybody has the same records, were you able to determine whether or not there was any medication that was prescribed for Mr. Wilson during one of his various stays?
Yes, I was.
And what are those medications?
So on 5/18/22 in the medical records, he was given Risperidol 1 milligram. 5/18/22 Invega. 5/18/22 Zoloft. 12/23/22 notation of Depakote. 2/13/23 Cymbalta. 6/27/23 Abilify. Currently lithium. In 2021, he was diagnosed with bipolar and antisocial disorder. He was also given in 2021 Lexapro 20 milligrams, Buspar 15 milligram, lithium 600 milligram, Trilpal and Lamictal. 3/8/22 bipolar versus schizoaffective was in the records. These are all documented in the jail medical records.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Okay. All right, you can sit down.
Can I have the court's indulgence to ask one question of Dr. Mills?
All right. Sir, and Doctor, you're still under oath, so.
Thank you.
Dr. Mills, you've just heard Dr. Eisenstein testify about various medications,
I did,
and you are a medical doctor.
yes.
And what are those medications usually prescribed for?
Well, the medications like Abilify, Geodon, Risperdal are all antipsychotic medications. They are used either to treat schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or bipolar disorder.
Okay. I don't have any further questions.
All right, any questions? All right, you can step down.
Thank you, Ron.
We will rest again.
All right. All right, it is 5:45, ladies and gentlemen. So what I'm going to do is let you go home for the evening, come back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I know you've heard my instruction before. It remains the same. Don't look up anything. Don't discuss anything about this.